Alright, so it is time to finally look at Don't Sleep on Shirou Emiya. And yeah, this is just basically like a whole movie right here. Got a whole hour and 10 minutes, so make sure you get something to drink, something to eat. As you can see, I already got the water sitting right here ready to go. So yeah, nothing much to eat, but still, just good to get some water, drink that, and yeah, let's just move on with it. I was actually going to put this in 2 parts just because it's literally a whole hour, but now I'm going to probably just try and just look at the whole thing here. It just depends on what happens from here on. So yeah, after this intro, if it is 2 parts, then you'll know if I just cut it, edit it in. But other than that, I hope you guys will enjoy this. Make sure you like, subscribe, and yeah, just get this reaction started.
Is it not long overdue to put respect on the GOAT's name? Shirou, when this is over, there will be no room for slander anymore. When he was up
I can tell a whole hour worth of this.
Being massacred
There's no excuse.
just by reinforcing his broken bow. This is while Heracles was being buffed himself. We've seen him fending off Medusa's dragon-tooth warriors, even going as far to mock them, saying that they're nothing after fighting Saber and Hurt. When Shinji tried to use shadow spells from his book, Shirou was blocking these attacks by only using reinforcement on his wooden sword. When Shirou projected his caliburn, he managed to cut straight through Herc's arm and save Ren after blocking multiple attacks from Heracles with his caliburn. He was still able to withstand the torment of having his muscles torn to shreds, still one of his greatest feats to this day. Alongside him projecting caliburn, him and Saber were able to obliterate Heracles 7 times over, taking over half of his lives at once and ending him on the spot. Heracles himself had to give his praise, saying, "I did not expect him to destroy my body 7-fold with a single blow." On top of his awareness of the surroundings, he was able to survive hits from Ku's Gable by picking up a poster that he found and using reinforcement. Even while Shirou was on the run, he still had the natural instincts to deflect Ku while he was going after him. You have the act of him disarming Ku in entirety despite him being a servant and a master of weapons. Even at the school, you had Shirou dealing with Shinji's shadow attacks when all he had at
using
the
a
time was
mop.
He didn't even bother to dodge them. At the end of the Fate route, Shirou had enough skill and consistency to take down Kirei despite him using
that moment, that was cool right there.
Shirou releasing Ren's Azoth dagger. When he was up against Shinji, not only was he skilled enough to outmaneuver him, but he threw his arm against the wall and broke it with pure strength. Had Shirou not stopped himself, then he believed he could have easily broke Shinji's neck in the process. When he was captured and being held captive at the Ainsburn Castle, completely ignoring the fact that he had bruised wrists, he made his way out of the rope that they held him in. When he was taking on the mental and the physical agony of being trapped by Kirei's Grail mud, he ignored the damage and still was able to make it through. This easily would have killed most people. When Tiger was showing everybody her crazy tricks on her moped, it was Shirou and only Shirou that was able to take on a full-on collision and live to tell the tale. Because Kiritsugu was able to save Shirou while he was still a child, Shirou has been blessed ever since by having Avalon inside of him. Because of this, it's been shown even by Ren that Shirou can heal at an absurd rate way faster than he's supposed to, as long as Saber is in vicinity. From the time that the story started, you had Heracles blow out his entire stomach and the same wound was healed in nearly 10 minutes. Mind you that this wound included his organs, his bones, and blood shooting out of his body. Even they were in shock that he was able to recover that fast. There are even times where this helps him ignore pain altogether and he doesn't even feel it. When Medea came over and invaded the household, by the time the interaction was over, Shirou was nearly finished healing the wounds that he received from her rule breaker. This includes literally taking a cut to his spinal cord. Ren even goes further to make the joke that he may only be able to die from decapitation. She also makes the joke that only vampires have the same type of healing rate, a subtle nod that his healing is dead apostle level, similar to the curse of restoration. She also questions if he's really human at all. In the bout that they had with Gilgamesh, Gil nearly sliced his entire body in half and he was able to survive this also. Saber Saber later mentioning that his body was able to heal just a few hours after the fact. He healed the wounds that he received when he was going up against Ryder. Ren still saying that his rate was excessive. When it came to his survival, Shirou recalls of the Fuyuki fire and how it nearly burned his entire body and how he managed to heal from that. When he got hit by Kukulkan's Gable, we've seen that he can expedite his healing by having direct interactions with Saber. Saber herself even going as far to say that his curse would no longer be effective. Again, we saw him use this in his fight against Kirei when he was trapped in the Grail mud container. Depending on the level of injury, just Saber touching against the wound will make the pain start to disappear. In his bout when he went against the CG dragons, Shirou had his entire body thrown straight through rock formations and endured the damage. He got pierced by multiple formations at once, all of which protruding out of the other side of his body. Still shook it off. He took a hit straight to the dome from Taiga's poster, which was made from steel, by the way. He took a full
You really just be the most smallest things that can be considered a feat or accomplishment.
At the school, he was agile enough to jump over an entire flight of stairs.
Yeah, like that.
He was being chased down by Ren. When Medusa came to the rooftop to save Shinji, Shirou took another brutal kick from her straight into a wall and endured the chest injury from that. In the fight against Heracles, we've seen him take a straight up Shoryuken to the face and shrug off the hit not long after. In one of the bad ends, Saber hit him so hard with her wooden sword that he broke the fourth wall and it sent him into the Tiger Dojo itself.
Ooh.
The game acknowledging that he died and he thought it was the afterlife. When Shirou tried to run up on Gil in their bout, he mentions that Gil literally summons a hammer and knocked him across the field like trash. The intensity of this hit was like all of the bones in his body were broken. He couldn't feel his limbs, nor could he tell if he still existed. Still survived. With the help of Saber catching him, he was able to survive a 3-story fall out of the school building. He also mentioned that he must have had cracked ribs from Medusa kicking him out of it. Shirou's diligence is unlike any other. The first year that he got into Magecraft, he did nothing but sleep, eat, and train all year, nearly facing death every single night. Even at a lower intensity, he just repeated it for 8 years.
That for 8 years,
his workout sessions. He's been seen doing as many as 170 push-ups.
Oh, nah, he
takes nothing
crazy
for granted and believes even his physical training can help his magic circus. Even at his day job, he claims that he often does 6 hours worth of work in 3 hours time. That too being manual labor. When he was trying to catch up to Saber, he rode his bike for 40 minutes straight going fast.
So it makes sense for why he's so like, yeah, got that resistance, right? Yeah, that endurance too.
Alone, he carried Saber for 2 hours all the way back to the crib.
Yeah, being able to carry someone, yeah, all of that.
Saber weighs nearly 90 pounds. In a moderate training session, we've seen that he's able to hang with Saber for 2 hours straight in the dojo. The day right after, we've seen him follow up with a more intense session going with Saber for 3 hours straight. You even had Ren at one point mention that they trained for an entire day, saying that she can't believe he's trying to match a servant. From the ground up, he ran all the way up to the top of a skyscraper just in order to catch up to Shinji in record time. Again, we've seen him running through the Ainsburn forest while carrying Saber for an hour straight, saying that she was light and his training really came in handy. We've seen him run full speed all the way from Fuyuki Bridge back to his house, saying that his heart felt like it was about to split open. In the last episode, Shirou mentions that he journeyed for what feels like forever in order to reunite with Saber, implying that this took years for him to accomplish at best. In terms of heat, he's been hit by Taiga with an entire pot of boiling soup and was able to shake it off. When the Grail mud tried to wrap around Shirou's ankle, he tactfully used his other leg to kick it off immediately. The mud itself operates a lot like dry ice, so he's technically being burned alive while he's doing this, by the way. Not only was Shirou able to stop Medusa from landing a fatal blow, but she was also in complete shock that her nail dagger couldn't get to him, and this is thanks to his body being made of swords. In fact, the dagger started to break apart. I am the bone of my sword is not just a slogan,
yes, literal.
Shirou himself mentions that every bone and muscle in his body feels like it's made out of swords. On top of him having Avalon, this also helps him restore his body and endure more damage. This ends up working so well that in a bad end, it actually kills him when he falls out of that 3-story window and blades start to protrude through his chest like a stake. When it comes to Medusa's Phantasm, Blood for Andromeda, which should be draining his body of energy, only has a moderate effect in comparison to everybody else. By infusing his body with magical energy, he can extend this further for a period of time. Even Ren was surprised that he was able to bear the pain of swallowing one of her strongest jewels, this same jewel being stated to be melting his insides. Ren also mentions that Shirou projecting Caliburn took so much energy that it should have been enough to blow off one of his arms. Every single day that Shirou trained, all the way up until the start of Stay Night, him using his Magecraft was likened to him sticking a metal rod inside of his spine. When Medusa kicked him out the window, Shirou mentioned that it felt like a sledgehammer and that he should have died from blood loss alone, still survived. When they were going against Hurt, he put a hole straight through Shirou's body and he still managed to survive the wound. When Shirou projected his Caliburn, he mentioned that he overused his magic circuits, implying that he exceeded the pain of death itself. When he withstood the pain of getting hit by Medea's rule breaker, he says it was like being cut in the back with scissors and having lead driven into it right after. When Gil sliced Shirou's entire body,
Lego
he says
pieces
the wound looked like Lego pieces that didn't fit together, that it should have taken his life instantly. He takes this a step further by digging into his own wound to keep himself from fainting. When he was having his one-on-one with Kirei, despite reinforcing himself with magical energy, he still had to literally tear his ankle muscles just to get to Kirei once the mud had caught him. When they were in the woods, Shirou managed to tank a hit straight to the neck from Medusa and ignore the pain. Again, you had Shirou tanking direct hits from Shinji's shadow spears, saying that they were nothing compared to Saber's training. In one of the bad ends, when Hurt finally caught up to Shirou, he ragdolled his entire body all the way into the cemetery, breaking his spine. And though he was fatally injured, he survived this also. In a bad end, the narration itself admits that a part of Shirou's regeneration is reliant on his willpower. Once he gives up, his regeneration will also, which is yet another nod to his diligence. Even before Shirou was getting the Avalon buff from summoning Saber, he had already been pierced through the heart by Cucullin and still survived. Ren mentioning that the wound wasn't severe enough to take him out completely. When he was fighting against Heracles, one of his hands were actually numb from trying to do a bare assault. During mid-conversation, he had the instincts and the reflexes to dodge Kaede when she tried to hit him. Mind you that she prioritizes in track, so she's arguably just as agile as him. During Ku's invasion, Shirou had the instincts and the speed to dodge his attack from the roof, despite him being the fastest servant in the war. When Shinji tried to hit Shirou with 3 shadow assaults at one time, he tactfully contorted his body to dodge all 3 of them. After just seeing the attack one time, his body immediately goes into reflex mode, which gives another nod to his instincts and his awareness. He also had the reflexes to dodge an entire CG dragon. Toro, get him off me. What you thought this was? Giving another nod to his awareness. Shirou is always making calculations in his head, pointing out that there's 4 meters between him and Gil before he made a move. Again, in a bad end, you had Shirou jump over an entire flight of stairs, going even further to say that it was nothing and it didn't hurt him at all. He was fast enough to push Saber out of the way when she was getting attacked by Hurt, except he's the one that caught the damage right after. He also has Protagonist EX, when Cursed Arm Hassan tried to hit him with one of his daggers while he was completely vulnerable. The dagger just magically missed and Shirou kept going. When Ren tried to hit Shirou with the point blank gander bullet, he had the instincts to dodge this as well. Before Shirou got kicked out of the window, he mentions how he reacted to multiple fatal blows that came from Medusa. He mentions that all of his training and his bouts with Saber further pushed the bounds of his instincts, saying that his body often reacts before his brain. When Cucullin was nearly about to take his life, It points out the fact that the more dire the situation, his awareness increases, saying that his assault looked like it was in slow motion. He mentions that during his training with Saber, there were times where she would move faster than his eyes could keep up with, which explains why he's used to certain scenarios. When he was fighting against one of Medea's dragon-tooth warriors, not only did he contort his body, but he reacted to a hit that should have been unavoidable. When Medusa tried to hit him with one of her nail daggers, he was quick enough to get away before it had contact. Again, in the Fate route, you had Shirou dodge even more of Shinji's shadow attacks when there was nowhere to run. Up against Kirei, even when he tried to use the Grail mud as projectile attacks, Shirou just found his own way to weave around them. In one of the bad ends, by heightening his concentration, you had him avoid one of Medusa's punches and start to head straight for Shinji. In another bad end, you had him mention that he can react to anything that Kirei does at least 2 meters away with no problem. When he was pissed off going up against Shinji, he was confident enough to believe that he could cross nearly 20 meters in just an instant. Thanks to his archery skills, he was accurate enough to land a hit straight at the Temple of Heracles. When he was participating in archery itself, he was hitting bullseyes with ease during his session.
Yeah, so you know you got that accuracy.
Who's literally the archery captain, on multiple occasions mentioned that when it comes to using the bow, there's nobody superior to him, and most people would agree. She goes even further to mention that she noticed he's always been better than all of them, and that before he quit, he would never miss his target. Shirou has mentioned how he also used to train with Kirisugu back when he was alive, and that it helped shape his mental state going into a fight. When Shirou found out that Shinji laid hands on Sakura, he decided to return the favor by landing a clean haymaker. When Shirou tried to jokingly hit Taiga, she immediately responded by whacking him on the head, showing that he had no shortage of great teachers in his life. Kirisugu, Saber, Taiga, it's no
did with a smile on her face too, like, yeah, he's still long way, still got a long way to go.
In just a few breaths, he can go back to his regular state. When he first started training with Saber, he would take vicious knockouts over and over again until he finally managed to take the first blow. Around this time, he himself mentioned that he could deal with the Doberman, which is also one of the most aggressive dogs that there is. By the end of the route, she says that he's way better than he was when he started. Saber herself even entertained the idea that Shirou could beat her if all the chances were in his favor, which is not just an implication, but also turned out to be true if you consider endings like Sparks Liner High. Multiple times throughout the story, you have it give highlight to his great senses, one being when he was chased down by Ku. At the church, he sensed the fact that Kirei was behind him before he properly revealed himself. He found the heart of Medusa's barrier, something that even Rin couldn't accomplish. Medusa complimenting this by saying she tried her best to hide it. When they were at the school, Rin pointed out that he's naturally sensitive to anything that's abnormal in the world. He has the awareness to recognize just by the way that she fights, Medusa isn't a superior servant to Saber. When his house was being invaded, he was immediately able to point out that Medea had brought in around 20 dragon-tooth warriors from the interaction that he had with Gil. Just by witnessing his Gate of Babylon, Shirou could already tell that his phantasms were real and not just projections like his. He was able to point out the fact that the Greater Grail had popped up later on in the story, before he actually saw it. Prior to Saber receiving her Avalon, he could also tell that she wouldn't be able
just
to
instantly
Gil
like
no
that. You
what.
just feel his aura.
Any heroic spirit in that war.
So he is very aware.
Just by him looking at Gil's Gate of Babylon, he could tell that he had an infinite amount of phantasms at his disposal. Before he even found out about the orphans that were underground, he could already sense the fact that something was off about the church. Even though the children had their bodies decayed to the point where he couldn't even tell they were human, he still recognized that they came from the Fuyuki fire. Just from interacting with Kirei during their fight, he could already tell that Kirei was maintaining his body from the Grail mud. His Magecraft itself is stated to be a concept that violates reality, and that he gives forms to things that shouldn't exist. Back when he swallowed one of Ren's jewels, the energy that he received from this made his potential increase dramatically. What usually took him an hour was now taking him an instant. In his fight against Kirei, he mentions that that the process of him doing a projection without anyone giving him additional help takes at least a minute of concentration. The effects of his command spell immediately told him that there was a servant nearby, that being Heracles. The effects of his spell also told him and Saber that they should be cautious when going near Medea. When he was in the classroom at the school, it also lit up to tell him that Shinji was nearby, Shirou running into him shortly after. This also gives him the ability to teleport summon Saber to his location immediately, calling her all the way to the school from home when he needed help. Shirou has also been seen using his skills to fix the objects of multiple people in the story, one of which being a motorcycle for a Yakuza member, who pays him handsomely for doing so. Again, by using his structural analysis, he was able to scan, locate, and fix 2 places where a heater was about to break. In a conversation that he was having with Rin, she mentioned the fact that a projection usually only has 30 to 40% of the foundation to the thing that it tried to replicate. In the forest, we've seen him use his Magecraft to turn a branch into an entire bow. He was able to replicate this just from seeing Archer's bow alone. Even Saber was in complete shock that he was able to project Caliburn thanks to the dream sequences in the Servant Master connection. The amount of energy and overuse to his circuits that this took left him with a headache that made him feel like his head was splitting open. Even in his fight against Gilgamesh, Shirou points out the fact that he was able to pillage the history of the sword, which allowed him to react to Gil's attacks. The sword itself was moving before he did. His abilities also allowed him to project Avalon and use it to reflect Enuma Elish back at him. The story also tells us that since Avalon has been in his body his entire life, it is the best replication that he can make out of anything that he reproduces. Saber herself, being the original wielder, says that it's perfect. In his fight against Kirei, the story tells us that he was able to force create the armament without any steps in his analysis at all, thanks to it being engraved on his soul. This made the entire projection process instant. At the end of the battle, he even projected a blanket in order to catch Ilya when she fell out of the sky. In his conversation with Rin, she mentions that in terms of efficiency, reinforcement is usually 10 times better than using projection. She also states the fact that the object that's getting the reinforcement ends up being at least 20 to 30% stronger and would last 100 times longer than a projection would. At the beginning of the story, we see that he's able to improve his vision just by reinforcing his eyesight with magical energy. Again, we saw him use reinforcement against Ku when he pushed magical energy into a poster and said that it turned out to be hard as metal. When he was practically weaponless at the school, he used reinforcement to do the same thing with the mop against Shinji, making it a lethal weapon and fending off the shadows. You had an ending where he even tried to reinforce Saber's body, and though the reinforcement was ineffective, he still was able to trace her composition. At the school, you had Shirou himself claim that he has no talent for Magecraft, meaning that most of what he does is the result of hard work. The story tells us that there's a bounded field set up around his house that catches intruders. When Ilya kidnapped Shirou and brought him to the Einsburn castle, he was able to use his own magical energy to drive Ilya's out of his body. You had Rin mention the fact that if each Magus has an attribute, then the one that Shirou has for sure is designated with swords. When Shirou got the temporary magic crest from Rin, this allowed him to receive reserves from her as long as the connection was still established. He further elaborates saying that he can now do projections dozens of times over when he could only do 6 at max before. When Medusa made the attempt to assault Shirou in the forest, he was able to respond at the last second despite her landing a powerful pushback. Using everything that he had, he was able to fend off a blow from Emiya himself that was originally designated for Saber. Again, you have him parrying hits from Medea's Dragon Tooth warriors with ease, following this up by crushing them. Despite the fact that he originally couldn't see Kazuki's fist, he still was able to block multiple strikes from them. When Kazuki tried to make a surprise attack on him and Rin, Shirou managed to block this for the both of them at the last second, Kazuki even praising him for pulling this off. When Emiya tried to strike Shirou multiple times in a row, he was fast enough to block all 4 of them. In one of the clashes that he had with Emiya, Shirou had enough force to break his swords first, something that even he was surprised at. At the end of the one-on-one bout that he had with Emiya, Shirou drove his sword straight through his chest. At the end of the bout that Shirou had with Gilgamesh, when Gil tried to pull out his Aya, not only did Shirou beat him to the punch, but he amputated Gil's arm on top of that. Only human, by the way. When Gil unleashed a barrage of swords at Shirou, he blocked multiple of them, even taking some to the body head on.
Yeah, and those are just literally flying at him too. Like, you gotta be ready.
2 Dragon 2 warriors at the same time and overpowered them both. When they were still at the school, he tactfully used the weight of his entire body to knock a whole door down, then launched the Dragon Tooth warrior down the hallway with the reinforced weapon. One by one, you had him sizing up the Dragon Tooth warriors before mincing them all into pieces. He was fast enough to slice 3 shots from Medea out of the air in order to protect Rin, ignoring the damage that he received on top of that. With his first UB-dub projections, you had him clash and fend off Kazuki. That's coupled with the fact of him being a seasoned fighter and a trained assassin. In a clash that he had against Saber, he was able to temporarily hold back Excalibur itself with his wooden swords. When Shirou was going against Emiya and he summoned his reality marble, Shirou was able to fend off a massive hailstorm of swords, then followed this up by suspending a giant one in midair. Within the confines of his reality marble, you had Shirou go blow for blow with Gil, who is one of the strongest servants in Fate, overpowering him and breaking his sword. You had Shirou physically overpower Rin, despite the fact of her being a trained martial artist from the time that she was a child. From the story, we know that as long as Shirou is contracted to Saber, he was receiving a healing effect whenever she was in vicinity. This is thanks to the overall effects of Avalon. The moment that Saber pulls fragments out of his back, the wound starts healing right after, which is a testament to his healing speed for lighter injuries. When he had his body sliced by Medusa, the wounds were already nearly healed by the time that he got home that same day. The story goes even further to show us that it was
it's crazy to think we still got 40 minutes left.
Magical exhaustion,
like, yeah, how much can Shirou do?
To heal, having his organs melted. Shirou also still receives residual effects from Avalon, even if he doesn't have the contract with Saber active, which would further explain Emiya's ridiculous healing. The story tells us that Avalon's effects will prioritize his wounds over his broken bones. It will then circle back around and heal those same bones later. You also had Avalon listen to Shirou's willpower and begin to heal his wounds immediately while he's inside the reality marble. Not only were Shirou's wounds healed from the fight that he had with Emiya an hour after he got home, but he also said that he felt good in this state. By releasing his magical energy, this also helped him survive being in vicinity of Aya, again one of the strongest weapons in Fate. When Rin saved Shirou in the woods with one of her gander bullets, he still had to endure the fall damage of him hitting the ground when he fell out the tree. Although it temporarily knocked him unconscious, he was able to withstand the fall damage of jumping off a cliff while carrying Rin to safety. At the school, he took on the damage of Rin hitting him directly in the forehead with her eraser, which literally flipped his entire body over. When they were up against Medea, he took the pain of 2 face shots and a hit to the abdomen from Kazuki and still was able to shake it off after. Despite the multiple beatings that he was taking from Kazuki's skill, Shirou still had the energy to grab him and stop him in his tracks. He also took a direct shot from Kazuki, got tossed all the way into a coliseum and still maintained his consciousness. In UB-dub, you had Rin smack Shirou multiple times with her pillow after he violated her privacy. This isn't even a feat, I just thought this was hilarious.
Yeah, okay.
To the dome piece from
I'm telling you, it's the most smallest things, but
her chains. He took a full-on
yeah, still doesn't consider it a feat.
Saying that he must have kicked him hard because he flew 5 meters when he did it. Even Saber in her weakened state was able to knock the breath out of Shirou just from tackling him, but ultimately he still stood his ground when she managed to do so. As he gained more experience, he took a direct kick from Emiya, who is still servant level, and was able to maintain his ground. When Ren was trying to chase down Shirou at the school, he mentioned the fact that she had ran out of physical energy before him, which also gives a nod to all the effort he put into his body. Her physical stature still doesn't match. In one of his most brutal training sessions with Saber, she goes against Shirou for 4 hours straight, Shirou himself mentioning that he feels like his life is in danger and that it seems like she's ready to kill him. In a conversation with Saber, he later mentions that he's trained his body to have better movement even after he's had his meals. The story tells us that he withstood great pain while he was going against Emiya. Just taking on his hits while trying to do his projections nearly made his brain explode. At another point in their battles, Shirou mentions that his magic circuits went into a level of overuse that felt like they were nearly broken, and he still pushed past this limit. The fight further elaborates on his torment. Broken fingers, slashed up limbs. Even when his body wasn't breathing properly, he still pushed on. Emiya himself, despite being a future variant, even he was surprised that Shirou continued to fight him back when he clearly had nothing left. When he was getting chased down by Ren, he mentions how he got shot in the leg by one of her buff gander bullets, and he still maintained his balance and kept getting away. Again, you had Shirou block an attack from Medusa's nailed dagger that nearly hit Ren in the head at the last second. The toll of Shirou projecting Emiya's swords for the first time were way higher than it looks, claiming that this had him out of it for at least 7 hours before he bounced back. He was able to shake back from a fatal wound straight to the body from Saber, Ren later confirming that this would have been wraps without his proper healing. When they were up against Medea, you had Shirou purposely eat a graze from one of Kazuki's punches in order to parry the more dangerous one. During one of his interactions with Emiya, he mentions that just blocking his attacks, he was already dealing with internal bleeding and still had to push through it. In the process of him keeping up his projections, he mentions that on top of the severe head pain, he also claims his insides were being melted and burned away. He had wounds from head to toe when he went against Emiya. He talks about how the wounds were so severe that he felt he could dig inside his body and pull out his bones himself. When Emiya went into his final reserves, he hit Shirou with a blow so hard that it broke one of his legs and his arms, and still Shirou continued to push on. In his battle against Gil, Shirou talks about how just loading up the blueprints for the phantasms were bruising his nerves. This is on top of him trying to ignore the blood that's coming out of his mouth from the internal bleeding in his stomach. At the school, when Ren shot a barrage of gander bullets at Shirou 4 meters away from him with nowhere to run, he managed to dodge majority of them. She practically hit everything in the room but him. Even Ren was surprised at his survival. Shirou goes into the fact that when he survived against Medusa in the woods, a part of it was thanks to his instincts, claiming that if he had been a second later, then she would have easily slit his throat instead of just grazing him. Again, when Shirou was running down the hallway of the school, he dodged another barrage of gander shots and made it to the staircase before Ren caught up to him. When Ren finally did catch up to Shirou, he decided that it would be a good idea to call her fat. This decreased his life expectancy immediately. She started shooting buffed up gander shots even stronger than the first ones. Despite the fact of these being bigger, he was only scraped by one of these as well. Despite Kazuki's fighting experience, we saw Shirou go blow for blow with him the moment he summoned his Kansho and Bakuya for the first time, when Saber was being controlled by Medea. Again, Shirou was able to temporarily hold her back before he was overwhelmed by her power. As he learned more experience from Archer and UB-Dub, you had him copying his projections at the last minute for his survival. When Emiya was moving at speeds that Shirou couldn't even keep up with, he still had the reflexes to respond when he tried hitting him in his blind spot. When they were up against Gilgamesh, Shirou mentions how he created his fastest projection this far when Gil tried to shoot Ren before she could react, and responded by knocking it out of the air. Inside his reality marble, you had Shirou consistently respond to Gilgamesh Gilgamesh while actively picking up weapons.
That
in
was
his realm
that
to
was
protect
insane.
himself. In the woods against Medusa, when Shirou took on another shot from Medusa's
But yeah,
dagger,
he just
once
learning
gained
as he
awareness,
goes.
He was able to completely bat this away. While still in the woods, he traveled nearly 30 meters while blocking attacks from Medusa, who he couldn't see majority of the time. At short notice, he even reacted to a burst attack from Saber in order to protect Ren. During their confrontation with Medea, when Saber tried to take her own life with Excalibur, Shirou jumped in between it to stop the impalement and still took on all the damage. He recalls the fact that in his fight against Kazuki, even when all his senses weren't working properly, he still managed to find a way to respond. Again, despite his experience, Shirou says that he can last at least a minute going against Kazuki one-on-one. In his training sessions with Saber, she realized that Shirou had a drastic improvement in his technique once he gained experience from Emiya, going as far to say that she was offended that he would ask for her help if Shirou was just going to copy him anyway.
Yeah, I mean, he's learning from himself, like literally.
Barring the fact that they had different physiques, their stances were exactly the same. During their fight, you had Emiya himself mention that he was getting better, stating that it's a magical process that allows Shirou to gain experience while he's fighting him, allowing Shirou to improve from his future self early. In the confines of UB-Dub, you had Shirou pressing the issue against Gil, forcing him to retreat, Gil having 2 swords to Shirou's 1. Shirou's awareness allowed him to sense Emiya trying to hit him at the beginning of the route. He was also able to spot him even though he was hundreds of meters away on a rooftop, to the point where he can even recognize the expression on his face, pointing out that Emiya was smiling while he was doing it. In a conversation that he had with Ayako, the story points out that Shirou can enter the same mental space as Emiya even if he didn't have his bow. The story also shows us that when Shirou has his eyes closed, he can still see his structure analysis through his eyelids. When he used his tracing ability at the school, he was able to locate one of the sigils that was holding up Medusa's blood for Andromeda, something that even Ren couldn't find. She followed this up by complimenting his skill. Ayako further tells Shirou that his mentality is out of the ordinary, that he's one with nature. In terms of martial arts, he's reached the level of nothingness. Although he couldn't actually see Emiya due to him being in his spirit form, Shirou could still sense that he was trailing behind him when he was walking. Emiya also complimenting him on how he can sense hostility. When Emiya was going against Medea at the temple, Shirou could already tell that she put no fear in his heart at all, just by looking at Emiya's demeanor. Shirou could already tell how much of a threat Ren was from a distance in the classroom. He further mentions that all the training that he's done with Saber upped this sense in danger. When Shirou and Ren were sneaking around trying to figure out who Gilgamesh was, his senses told him at that point, if they were to follow him, then both their lives would come to an end. When Medea was trying to throw the whole group off by manipulating the situation, Shirou was the main one to recognize this. Ren also pointing out that he must have a higher sense of detection than everybody else. Again, you have Shirou mentioning that even if he can't see Archer outright, he's still able to feel his presence nearby. There's even a point where he was getting a headache that was telling him that Ren was in the church, his body pushing the issue that he addressed it. Again, just like in the Fate route, you had Shirou mention that he could tell Gil's phantasms were the real deal now that he had projected Emiya's. Due to Shirou having his tracing ability, he's become very familiarized with hardware, often being touted as the most reliable handyman at the school. During their H scene, Ren was so shocked by the size of Shirou's meat that it sends her into a panic, claiming that it was at least twice the size that she thought it was going to be. He's also so good at rock, paper, scissors that he doesn't even use the other 2 choices. He only picks rock. In a Face Stay Night Q&A, it's mentioned that if there was an eating contest, Shirou would be the one that comes in 4th place. When they were at the temple, Medea claims that Shirou's magical resistance is around the same level as the people in the town. further being able to back this up considering she's the one that brought him there. In another conversation that he had with Ren, she points out the fact that his projections usually align with swords, saying that this must be his attribute. Shirou mentions that since he's doing the process earlier than he's supposed to be, each projection feels like he's deteriorating his magic circuits. He also goes into the fact that just one magic circuit allows him to make 2 swords. In his fight against Emiya, you had him mention that Shirou's base level of projections stops when he reaches around 8 of them. In terms of usage, you had Shirou himself mention that it takes 2 magical units to do reinforcement and 5 of them to do projection. During his fight against Kazuki, Shirou mentions for him specifically, Kansho and Bakuya are better than just rushing out nameless blades, which is why he always defaults to those instead of others. At the time that he first projected the swords, the story tells us that he was able to block 30 back-to-back punches from Kazuki, and he would have been able to block more if he could keep up the reinforcement. During their second bout, Shirou was fully aware that if he kept projecting these swords that he was going to lose his life, but he still continued to do so in order to protect Ren anyway. Regardless of his base limits, when Emiya tried to use a barrage of projections against Shirou, he copied all 18 of them in order to cancel the attack out. At the Einsburn Castle, we've seen that he's able to project Durandal, one of the strongest swords in Fate. At the temple, with the help of Ren's temporary crest, his tracing abilities allow him to keep up with Gil's phantasms, which were not only real, but appeared in barrages even heavier than Emiya's. He also mentions that he was able to copy every weapon up until a certain point except Aya. The conceptual structure of the weapon was beyond his understanding.
Oh yeah,
Among
can't
Emiya's
do that.
reserves, Shirou also gained access to his Ro Ayas, which he was able to reproduce against Gilgamesh, still taking damage during the process for every petal that Gil got through. In the materials, it further elaborates that the Ro Ayas came directly from Emiya, and that he was the one that truly opened the gateway to this. Even in iterations like Prisma Ilya, this remains to be true. At the church, the story points out that when Shirou isn't under the stress of combat, he can project Emiya's swords in less than a minute. With the help of Ren's crest and Archer's experience, Shirou was able to cast his own version of the UB-Dub Reality Marble, a spell regarded as one of the highest levels of Magecraft there is, a level closest to true magicians. From the dictionary itself, a subset of a marble phantasm, it arose reality and gives form to the user's imagined world. It is the closest to magic and a forbidden art within the association due to its influence. When Ren tried to take multiple shots at Shirou, he was able to block them off by reinforcing his bag, essentially turning it into a shield. As she continued to chase him down, he preemptively reinforced an entire door just to make sure that she doesn't get in. This also gave him time to escape through the other side. The entire time, Shirou is steady making calculations and using everything at his disposal. He took off his own jacket and reinforced it in order to block more of her shots. This is something that also caught her by surprise. At the point that she got through the door, he reinforced an entire desk that he was behind to avoid a barrage and protect himself. When she destroyed the entire room that he was in, he took notice of this and decided to reinforce a chair leg and use it as a weapon. With his ability to trace, he mentions that he can relocate magical energy inside of his body, saying that he can push Medea's poison into one of his limbs in order to function with the others. Again, like the Fate route, we've seen that he can force summon Saber to his location with his command spells when he needed help at the school. When Medea tried to send off a larger energy shot, Shirou was able to fend this off by reinforcing his weapon. Even if Shirou isn't able to use a command spell, he can communicate senses of danger to Saber that allows her to know that he's in trouble. This also goes as far as waking her up out of her sleep for contact. In Heaven's Field, you had him mention that he cut Zokin's entire worm vessel body from shoulder to hip with just his reinforced weapon. After the intense bout that him and Medusa had with Saber Alter, Shirou was the one that ended up putting Salter down with the help of the Azov dagger. This is despite Salter still having the overall advantage. During the bout at the school, cool. With all the energy he had, he punched Shinji dead in the face for what he did to Sakura. Just moments before that, he was able to elevate himself over Shinji to catch him by surprise. This includes literally swiping the knife from his hand and leading Shirou to cutting his own while ignoring the pain. In the one-on-one battle that Shirou had with Saucer in Sparksliner High, he mentions that he blocked 30 back-to-back attacks from her that all could have taken his life. With both of them using their collapsing bodies, Shirou was able to trade multiple punches with Kirei despite the fact of him being 20 years older and a master of martial arts. He straight up dodges one of Kirei's assaults in order to tackle him and lift him into the air. He also brought it back to the basics by flat out headbutting him in the fight, breaking his nose.
Yeah, just doing whatever he can.
In one of the 8 scenes involving Medusa, the story tells us that Shirou's sperm is so strong that it can tickle you. During Heaven's Field,
what is
Saber
this,
got
bro?
taken away by the shadow. This cut the connection that allowed Shirou to heal from his Avalon, meaning that all the damage that he went through, he had to endure wholeheartedly. At the temple, we know that he took a direct punch to the face and the body from Cursed Arm Hassan and still was able to shake back. We saw him bear the damage of multiple hits from Medusa, Shirou claiming that one of the blows knocked all of the feeling out of his arm. When they were entering the Ironsburn Castle, you had Kirei literally toss him through a window and Shirou just ate the damage. We also saw him fall from the same castle, going a distance that was equal to 8 stories without magical assistance, and he took the damage from that. Kirei even complimenting him on his toughness. In his fight against Kirei, during his collapsing state, he took a brutal kick that launched him multiple meters into the air. Then he took a punch from Kirei that was strong enough to pulverize his organs. In one of the 8 scenes, you had Shirou mention that he ejaculated half of his organs out and he still had the mental fortitude to push on. Even at a point when he was tired, he still had enough endurance to run 3 miles at full speed, all the way from the crib to the church. When Darkened Heracles landed a hit on Shirou that sent him flying through the forest, it was Shirou himself that angled his body to stop himself by hitting a tree, on top of enduring the pain that came with it. When they were running through the forest away from Heracles, again you had Shirou run 3 miles with Ilya in his arms at the same time. Thanks to the healing effects associated with his body, Shirou mentions that he's never caught a cold until the Heaven's Field route.
That is actually crazy.
Sakura, he willingly ate a blow from the shadow straight to his back. He also did this to ensure Ren's safety. You had another blow where the shadow struck him in the stomach, which he ended up shaking off immediately. In his fight against Kirei, due to the fact of Shirou's body being made of swords, it continuously tried to overwrite all of Shirou's wounds with swords. This was the final stand to keep his body functioning. In exchange, his mind collapsed even more with it. You had Kirei himself comment on the fact that the price of hitting Shirou in this state means that you have to cut your own body in return. Just earlier, you had Shirou mention that his joints turned into steel, claiming that he could probably take bullets if he had to. When Shirou was addressing the pain of Archer's arm, even when he was in a standby state, him just moving the arm felt like a knife going into his body and turning. When he finally took off the shroud that was covering Archer's arm, the story tells us that it was 10 times worse than all the pain he had felt up until this point. That same pain being some of the worst he's had in his life. When he was making his way towards the Grail, he ignored hundreds of swords coming out of his body to fulfill his promise to Sakura and the world. When Saber came into the room unexpectedly, within seconds Shirou was already in a fighting position, Saber herself complimenting him on his movement. Towards the end of the route, you had Shirou dodge multiple whips from the shadow from every direction in order to save Sakura. This includes jumping across multiple formations where he easily
just out there moving.
During one of the bad ends, you had Shirou himself mention how he was able to dodge one of Medusa's daggers with amazing speed. In Sparksliner High, despite the current condition of his body, Shirou mentions how he can jump 2 meters all the way to the door if he used all of his strength. during his battle with Salter. In an even more fatal condition, he mentions how he closed 10 actual meters between him and Salter in a heartbeat. The story also tells us that he caused a separation between them at the same distance as a part of his strategy. When Ren was about to be assaulted by the shadow, not only was Shirou fast enough to knock her out the way, but he temporarily took on all the evils from this attack in her place. Back at the school, even when Shirou was partially slowed down by Medusa's mystic eyes, he still ignored being petrified to get Ren out of the way of Sakura's assault. Against Darkened Heracles, once Shirou initiated his 9 lives blade works, the story tells us he had already surpassed the speed of sound. In his one-on-one against Salter, by baiting her with multiple Kansho and Bakuya projections, Shirou was able to land a blow on her faster than she could react, despite her being a servant and one of the highest ones there is. When they were getting chased by Heracles in the forest, Shirou points out the fact that he was running at nearly 30 miles an hour. This surprised even him, saying that Emiya's abilities must be flowing into him. In Sparks Ladder High, Shirou acknowledged himself to be moving at the speed of a bullet when he was trying to keep up with Salter. In the Mind of Steel Bad-In, the story tells us that Shirou committed to winning by adopting the Kirisugu philosophy. This includes him putting down Zoken, Elyasville, and Ren in the process. In a Q&A, it gets further elaborated that he accomplished this by taking everybody out in a 1v1. This means that he took out all the other competitors, Kirei, the servants, and still was the only one to survive. By using his tracing ability, he was able to locate Ilya's presence in the castle, the spell telling him that she was on the 3rd floor exactly. When dealing with the pressure of Archer's arm, Shirou mentions this to be the first time that he's experienced fear since he was a child, and it took the writhing agony of this arm in order to do it. Without Kirei giving notice, Shirou
Chinese martial
was
arts.
using Chinese martial arts while he was fighting against him, a subtle nod to his awareness. Even when Shirou was injured, we see him committing to his daily training. Despite the fact of him having a restricted arm, he was able to reinforce the paper in his session in a matter of seconds, in preparation for his battles. With just him
Okay, so
picking
yeah, I
up a
see it
stick
now. There's
nearby,
still
he was
actually
able to
quite a
reinforce
couple of
it
things
and turn
that
it into a weapon
I
that's
just
at
did
least
not know
grade
about
level. At a
Shirou.
moment's
But it's
notice,
just, yeah, it's
in
not
order
that
to
much
stop
though.
the next blow that he received from being fatal, he
Let's
decided
see.
to reinforce his uniform, making it as
Yeah,
hard
just a
as
few
steel,
things,
with no
that's
help
all.
involved. He was able to survive against Zoken's worms, which were easily overwhelming enough to eat him alive the entire time. Before his interaction with Medusa at the school, he tactfully stole a book off the shelf, reinforced it, and put it beneath his uniform in order to survive against her blow. When he was at the Mato household, Zoken mentions how Shirou destroyed all the worms that were present just by putting magical energy into the wall and doing a sweep that wiped them out. With the help of Archer's arm, the story tells us that Shirou was able to reinforce his black key at a speed of 200 miles per hour. Shirou himself mentioning that he didn't even have to think before the process was already done. Despite it not being enough power for the body of Heracles, it further goes on to tell us that the black key he did reinforce was as strong as diamond. In the forest against the shadow, when Shirou threw himself out in the open to protect the others, he had his entire arm blown off of his body and he still survived, everyone being in shock that he withstood Emiya's as his replacement. Back at the crib, when he entertained the idea of briefly unwrapping the shroud that covered the arm, this sent a feeling of death throughout his entire body. After him just using the arm one time, the weight of the arm was so devastating that his memories and his consciousness began to fade. Only the deepest pain or the highest concentration kept him as being Shirou Emiya. This also meant that he was unable to maintain his sleep schedule once he reached a certain point in the war, meaning the remainder is just going off of straight willpower. The story tells us that after his first use, his body was already on the path to immediate destruction. Having access to only 4 projections in total, the 3rd time he'll completely lose his sense of self, and the 4th time he'll self-detonate. Due to the arm's connection, we find that Shirou was receiving information about Archer's database faster than both the prior routes combined, learning every detail about all the weapons it knows in only 3 hours. It further goes on to tell us that the arm didn't even remember all the weapons that Emiya had, and it still was this painful. The arm itself itself having a database that's close to 1,000. Before Herc sent him flying with the following hit, Shirou was able to successfully project his axe sword and block one of his attacks. After a full successful recreation of his weapon, Shirou was able to use his own version of Herc's Phantasm, 9 Lives Bullet Revolver. In other words, 9 Live Blade Works, taking out the rest of his remaining lives shortly after. By just having access to Ilya's memories, Shirou was able to project the same gem sword that belongs to Zelrech, one of the greatest weapons in the entire franchise, and the output of his copy was nearly indistinguishable. In the 2v1 that him and Medusa had against Salter, Shirou projected his own version of Ro'ayas that allowed him to divert the blast and allow Medusa to get her attack in, as a means to destroy the Holy Grail. During the time of Shirou's collapsing body, he projected his own version of Salter's Excalibur Morgan. Just before this, you had him project his own version of Rule Breaker in order to free Sakura from Angra's influence. In one of the endings during the battle against Salter, he projected Calibur in order to help Medusa, and this immediately ruptured his left eye. In another ending, right before he was stopped by Ilya, he used the remainder of his existence to destroy the Grail and ensure everyone else's safety. No revives, no having his soul put into a doll. He literally sacrificed his life for the greater cause. In Sparks Liner High, by using Archer's experience, Shirou pointed out the fact that he was fighting against her nearly at a servant's level, saying that he was surprised himself he could keep up. At a point in the fight, you had him project Kansho and Bakia on a level where it would take Salter multiple blows for her to destroy them. Towards the end of the battle, you had Shirou use Archer's triple crane technique, trapping Salter with the over-edged versions of his swords. It further tells us that this not only splattered her organs, but it crushed her spine along with it. By the end, we find that Shirou actually defeated Salter in this one-on-one, but it took so much energy out of his body to perform the task that he couldn't land the final blow. His body stopped abruptly the same way that Kirei's did at the end of Heaven's Field. Before she regenerated, Salter still complimented him for being able to pull this off. Now we move into the Miyu-verse version of Shirou.
All of that?
The Prisma Ilya variant. After he bought the black keys off of Kirei. In order to save Miyu, he spent
that whole 50 minutes for basically one Shirou.
Field of the Ainsworth Castle in order to get through it. Shirou himself mentioning that the black keys were like toys to him during their use. After Shirou first installed Emiya's class card, he immediately cut off Shinji's arm when he was trying to stop it. When Shinji tried to trick Shirou and use his fake vessel as a decoy in order to distract him, Shirou feigned ignorance the entire time, only to stab Shinji in the stomach when he tried to sneak up behind him. Shirou follows this up by ending Shinji's life with no remorse, releasing his soul from the doll that he was in. During the Grail War, we've seen him decisively put down Atrium while using the caster card. In his battle against Zachary Ainsworth, he straight up amputated his arm while he was using the Saber card. He went blow for blow with Angelica, despite her having the Gilgamesh card, and Shirou also losing his by that point in time, though he did still siphon Emiya's experience. When she tried to shoot him with the barrage of swords, he knocked every single one of them down with just Kansho and Bakia. Just moments after he installed the Emiya card, he punched Shinji so hard that it sent him flying out of the shed out into the yard. During the war, despite the fact of Kanev having Ku's card and Hydrodrome on his side, that still wasn't enough to stop him from losing to Shirou. This includes Shirou tactfully weaving around Hydrodrome by using the axe
and accurately, like, yes, putting that blade into him too, as well.
Multiple brutal kicks from Shinji and still withstood the pain. In their battle against the Ainsworths, he took a direct hit from Beatrice's Mjolnir and still survived. When in the same scene, Beatrice broke the entire mounting felling sword in half with the same weapon, comparing it to paper mache. In its base form, Shirou took a kick from Sakura directly to the face while she had the Lancelot installed and got right back up after the fact. When Julian came to abduct Miyu, shortly after dropping Shirou straight out of the sky, he had Angelica pierce him multiple times to stop him in his tracks. he survived this as well. When going against Zachary, Shirou used his knowledge of Excalibur against him, pointing out that Excalibur is meant to be swung with 2 hands, and by that point Zachary had already been amputated. Shirou followed this up by surviving an Excalibur blast and hitting him with a broken phantasm to the face right afterwards. When he was being held captive, you had Shirou flat out get electrocuted by Angelica's shackles, and he still was able to shake back from the damage. He's been shown to have a high level of dexterity, being able to chop a pipe during his training session into 4 equal pieces in an instant. He also adopted a fighting style that was similar to Kiritsugu's in order to honor his role during his upbringing. In his fight against Angelica, he's shown a rare instance of doing combat and projecting at the same time, knocking down her blades to protect himself while also having his blade surrounding him at the ready. Again, inside his reality marble, you had him go blade for blade with Angelica long range while continuing to knock down her assaults. He even pulled off a hard read on her movements, knocking down an entire wall of phantasms before she even shot them off. Even when Shinji started to panic and try to hit Shirou with dirks at close range, he was fast enough to reinforce his cloak and catch them in order to avoid the damage. When he was up against Shinji's giant vessel, despite this form having the size advantage, Shirou was still dodging multiple whip attacks from speed and skill alone. When Sakura was still in her Lancelot class card, when she tried to throw projectiles at Shirou, he had the reflexes to knock them all down at the last second. This is on top of being prepared for her assault that came right behind it. Even when he was just a child, he risked his life to save Miyu when the entire roof was about to collapse over her head. When him and Kuro were making their approach to Angelica, Shirou dodged multiple phantasms while making projections on the spot in order to keep up. We also saw him and Kuro make a joint row Ias in order to block Angelica's phantasms that were being buffed by her displacement, accelerating their speed. Even when Angelica had him restrained with Enkidu, Shirou was able to get off UB-Dub's chant fast enough to trap her before she finished him off. Inside his reality marble, it took Angelica's best resources in order to fully shut Shirou down. This includes her firing off Enuma Elish, and even then Shirou was able to temporarily hold it back with the wall of his swords. During their battle, you had him project the 2 massive weapons, Igalima and Susagana, both of which being noted as divine constructs, and using them to match Angelica's versions. You had the both of them colliding with the barrage of weapons, and despite the fact of Angelica having the originals, Shirou was still canceling out all her attacks. Just prior to him bringing out the reality marble, he had already summoned his Ro Ias to protect himself during the chant, meaning that he was using absurd amounts of magical energy which should have left him exhausted, but he only pushed harder the more that the fight went on. You had Angelica try to summon an entire wall of shield phantasms, and not only was Shirou able to get around this, but he brought out an entire claymore that put her in even heavier defense. In his interactions with Julian, he's even been seen using his reinforcement on a tape measurer, the story pointing out the fact that it was at least blade level by it causing Julian to bleed. In his fight against Shinji's giant vessel, we've seen that he has access to a unique detonation technique where he weaves together multiple projections of Kansho and Bakuya and makes the target explode from the inside. Due to the yin and yang effect of Kansho and Bakuya, we've seen through multiple battles that he can make a slew of projections that gives the swords a motion tracking effect due to their background. When he was up against Karya using the Medusa card, this is also the same effect that saved him from being petrified, when the swords circled back around and hit him from behind. When he recreated the axe sword of Heracles, the moment he projected the weapon, he cleaved through multiple shadows in a matter of seconds. Again, when they were up against the shadows, you had him protect the entire group by projecting a massive version of Roias, fending off a wall of shadow phantasms. Again, when they were up against the Ainsworths, you had Shirou casually project Igalima and turn it into a bridge in order for their team to navigate. During that same fight, you had him create an entire wall of massive swords and use them as a shield. Even even when Angelica tried to use her displacement spell and shoot Shirou from his blind spot while he was trying to defend himself. He still had the reflexes to respond at the last second, even with Thor's hammer being buffed multiple times over. The story shows us that Shirou's Ro-Ayas was enough to completely shield the team and avoid any damage. In his base form, we've seen him go into his overedge technique for Kansho and Bakia when he saw that Sakura was in a vulnerable position. Again, giving another nod to his awareness, he could tell Ilya and Kuro were listening in on their conversation without them even knowing. At the school, you had Sakura giving praise to his archery ability, saying that he wasted no movements and says that he's synchronized like he's one with the bow himself. In the fight against Sakura, when she was using the class card, you see him double down on that statement by having the accuracy to snipe her directly in the hand. Again, at another point, you had him shoot her in the side during movement, and it was strong enough to knock her to the ground. Following the combat strategies of Kirisugu, you had him throw an entire grenade at Sakura while he wasn't looking in order to create space. He then comes right behind this with Kirisugu's Calico and sprays her with a barrage of bullets, forcing her to go into defense with her shadow whips. Even when she tried to dodge bullets from the Calico, Shirou already strategically had a landmine placed in his yard that blew her off of the ground. He did in fact solo the entire Ainsworth War in one night, beating everybody in.
I mean, he was going one after one.
And he did all of this.
Just kept on moving.
17. Get on his level. Then we get into the pseudo-servant form of Shirou, that being Muramasa. And of course, it is Shirou's body, so he does do majority of the heavy lifting. Against possessed Inshun, before it breaks, he was able to knock off the.
Oh, I was like, what am I looking at? I did not see that.
Blow from his sword. Musashi herself being surprised at this power and that he only did it with one hand. This is after dodging Inshun's thrust, which Musashi considers a feat on its own. When you had Musashi trying to troll with his sword, he casually tossed her on her head even though Muramasa wasn't even looking. He also does the same thing to the rest of the group, jokingly launching Ritsuka, Fuma, and Musashi into the air with one punch. In LB5, the story tells us that alongside Rasputin, both of them massacred multiple heroic spirits from pan-human history. The story goes even further to say that it was at least 20 of these servants that were present. In terms of his ability, he's mentioned to have mastered 100 swords and at least 1,000 sword techniques. We also find that Muramasa sliced directly through Lost Belt Hephaestus while he was there. Even Sherlock was surprised by this feat. During the emergence of the servant Atlas's summoning, Muramasa was the one that stopped him in his tracks by also slicing him in half. He can reinforce energy into his blade for a more
I got that
strike.
drip on, okay.
A massive energy wave directly from his sword. As a proper bladesmith, he can also use his reality marble to ignite the flame of his attacks. From Shimosa, we found out that he put up a barrier that defended against spirits up to a certain caliber. We've had Muramasa himself say that his smithing skills are on par with the gods. When addressing his sword, Musashi mentions that just being in his presence feels like there's a divine aura. Muramasa himself saying that it could cut through diamond with no effort. On top of this, he mentions that the sword itself has conceptual priority, being able to sever bonds, certainty, and karma. It's been mentioned that he was the one that created the statues in LB5, casually making at least one a day. Even the god Hephaestus tells us that Muramasa was the one that saved him through his intervention. You had Canis mention how he snuck up behind her without her even noticing, pointing out the fact that he's no ordinary heroic spirit. This is considering her being divine level herself. In Shimosa, when Muramasa activated his phantasm, Sumukari, he was able to slice straight through not only Onrieto Castle, but the entirety of Amakusa's reality marble in exchange for his life, taking everybody by surprise. In LB6, from the time that he dropped into the chapter, Muramasa was able to sneak into Morgan's castle and nearly assassinate her, and he had no one backing him up when he did this. Castoria herself mentioning in the 2 millenniums of her reign, no warrior has been able to do this. You had Castoria bring up his body's ability to adapt, saying that he can take in external energy on the same level as if it was his own. Oberon also mentioning that his fighting skills are a cut above the average servant, giving light to his background. You had Muramasa bring up the fact that in his alter ego variant, he specialized against divine spirits, the alien god themselves stuffing him with multiple divine entities when he was summoned. This includes the blind god Hotter and the god of seas and storms Susano. When he infiltrated Morgan's castle, Muramasa elaborated that this meant getting past Tristan and Fairy Knight Gawain as well, Barghest herself making the argument that she was being held back, but Muramasa claims that he could take her on unrestricted even if it was a one-on-one. The person who did finally stop Muramasa before he got to Morgan was of course Melusine, who dog-walked Muramasa by his own words and tossed him into the Great Pit. This same pit being at least 6 miles deep. On top of all his injuries, Muramasa spent the next 3 days climbing all the way out the pit. We also find that him just surviving against Melusine is a feat in and of itself, stating that the average servant would have lost their life 12 times over. When Grimmer made his first appearance, that being the pseudo-servant form of Odin, Muramasa was able to immediately detect this despite the fact he was hiding in the form of a white wolf. When Grimmer went up against Muramasa in a one-on-one sparring match, Castoria was the one to step in, ending it on a stalemate, though Muramasa admits that he could have done better. In his grand sacrifice at the Skyforge, you had Muramasa give up his life in Castoria's stead in order to create Excalibur's essence, the essence itself being suited for a divine construct, which makes it even more impressive, showing his compatibility for one of the strongest armaments. We also know that in the arcade timelines, Muramasa was sent specifically to pacify the evolution of Draco. With the help of his conceptual phantasm, he was able to sever the connection of her singularity from the rest of the parallel worlds, which in turn would have reverted her back into Mother Harlot, essentially stopping an entity from becoming a full beast. In Carnival Phantasm, you had him use his projection to make a tool that cut the Grail in half entirely. During the race, you had Shirou survive a car crash when he was riding with Saber, tanking the damage when most people would have lost their life.
And that's just stuff you don't even take serious. It's just kind of like, okay, yeah, they're just messing around, get hit by a car.
Survived this despite it nuking most of the city. In the Emiya cooking show, you had Shirou eat Emiya's volleyball spike straight to the face when he was clearly trying to put him in a box. And one of the best qualities of all, he's a master chef. He's out here putting housewives to shame. Literally, in the Emiya cooking show, he has a list of real go-to recipes that are documented from the series. When he was carrying sake, he was able to notice Sasaki and look directly at him despite the fact that he was in his spirit form. In Carnival Phantasm, when everybody was vying to reach the finish line, you had Shirou strategically project the sword when he was with Saber in order to cross the line before everybody else and win the race. I said it before and I'll say it again. It's the dream team.
That's crazy right there.
You had him
imagine that.
Medusa and Cucullin the beast only using his wrench. Everybody can get the work. Listen, man, the proof is in the sauce. And a wise man once said, if you ain't got the sauce, then you're lost. Who really can step up to the plate with this man? This is God body. A ranking? You can't even rank this type of resume.
Just
he
broken.
Broke the scale. There is no fate without Shirou. All these new dudes are just now joining the club. He been paved the way. He's just giving you a chance to catch up. And guess what? You never will. But we appreciate you playing. This is a mismatch.
Okay, and then, oh, let me play that again. That is it. Well, yes, a whole hour and 10 minutes. But yes, we are now done. So actually, I'm going to just keep this short. I don't even want to talk for too long right now. Not that actually I even have much to say. Yeah, so like I already said, yeah, there were a few things that I new things that I kind of found out about. I can't even remember now. I mean, yeah, just so much information here. And all of this, yeah, it's crazy. Like, I'm really surprised at how much, like, I was paying attention to the anime, like, while reacting to it. But it's like, wow, I really was not, like, you know, paying attention to, like, this small little feat here. So yeah, literally, yeah, whether it's him getting hit by a car or something, yeah, it's like, I'm not even really thinking about that. It's like, yeah, that's actually pretty impressive to just get hit by that and then still just get up, you know? No, like, yeah, you just sitting there for, like, I don't know, 10 minutes and then you finally get up. Like, no, pretty much seconds later, it just gets up and it's like, oh yeah, I'm fine. And stuff like this too. Oh, did I go past it? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I couldn't remember that for some reason, I guess. Yeah, I had to go back and look at that. So yeah, he literally was able to detect Archer here from, I mean, such a like, big distance, or such a distance, right? Yeah, hundreds of meters, and then even can detect that he's smiling. That's crazy. Like, how do you even know that? So yeah, I guess you could say I get that whole broken thing. Yeah, his body is just so resistant. Yeah, and it's stuff like that too that I didn't really know. Like him training for, what was it, like a whole day with Saber. It's either a whole day, he would do 2 hours straight, 3 hours, maybe even 4 hours straight fighting and training with Saber. And after that, yeah, what did he say? He would eat a meal and still be able to move just as if he was like training. And that's actually pretty impressive. Yeah, most of the time after a good meal, especially after working like that, hey man, get that good meal. It's like, yeah, you're feeling like a good nap or just ready to go to sleep or just simply chill out. But apparently Shirou, he's just ready to get right back into that action right away. Let's see. Actually, no, I'll just go right from the beginning. So yeah, stuff like this right here, yeah, pretty much already know about that. Now, yeah, that whole situation with Cullen, I mean, that's actually pretty impressive just to begin with. Being able to, yeah, detect him, you know, that danger and all that. Able to actually dodge his attacks. Because, yeah, this is a servant. Like, I mean, they're pretty much going to be moving real quick, right? It's not going to be a human type of speed. Yeah, it's going to be speed to where it's like they're swinging at you and you can't even see their blade no more. They're just, yeah, gone. So they're probably moving that quick to where you can barely even see them. Yeah, all you can do then is just really detect them and, I don't know, just be aware. Oh yeah, also that, yeah, his awareness. Yeah, like I said with the whole Archer thing, it's like being able to detect them from hundreds of meters and that smile. I'm just like, wow, okay. But yeah, Shirou definitely doing, yeah, and stuff like this, being able to walk forever and carry people, carry Saber, carry Iya. It's like, yeah, no wonder he's able to do all of that. He's just been constantly training, literally as if he was about to die like every day. And yes, that is going a little overboard, but we can clearly see, like, yeah, it's really benefiting him. We can see the results of it. And at the same time, whether, because I know it's definitely a significant difference whether he actually saw his future self, you know, the Emiya Archer version. So yeah, there is a significant difference. So if he didn't really, you know, get to see him and actually know about that in general, being that future self and all, it's like, yeah, he probably wouldn't have been as experienced, you know, because they could tell, like, yeah, he was getting more experience the more he fights himself. Obviously, it's yourself, so of course. But at the same time, he can still really get a lot of experience, and it's not even just, you know, Archer in general, just simply fighting, yeah, Gilgamesh and all that. It's like he's getting this experience, and it's kind of like, yeah, his life is on the line. Of course, definitely you're going to be doing a lot more if your life is on the line. And it's like, okay, hold up, I need to be doing these projections right now. I need to do the reinforcement. I need to do something right now if I want to, you know, keep on facing off against Gilgamesh. And then at the same time, the significant change actually fighting himself and, yeah, changing and being able to at least handle those projections ahead of time before going against Gilgamesh. Yeah, definitely this right. Yeah, I already had respect for Shirou, but yeah, this just gives me even more respect for him. Like, yeah, I was not aware of this. Like I said, just a few things, but yeah, that training and all, I'm like, okay, yeah, literally about to kill himself, and then especially with Saber. then how aware he is too. Yeah, I already know about that. Yeah, basically, yeah, just being your handyman, right? Yeah, just being able to repair things, basically for free. He could really, I'm telling you, if he made a business or something, he'd be making some money right now, being able to repair stuff. Because yeah, those projections, that really helps out, because you literally have to analyze that object. So you're gonna know like the ins and out of it. You're gonna know what's gonna be needed, some tape, some glue, whatever's gonna be needed to like fix it up. Now I ain't even gonna lie, this was like, yeah, when I was first starting anime, so I don't think I really are reacting to it. But yeah, just him actually, yeah, I was not thinking about that. Him actually being able to see through, I did not like notice that. So yeah, knowing that now, it's like, okay, he was actually able to see through. And I think, yeah, even closing his eye, yeah, it's like literally the literal things. Like, you know, I would just expect that to be like an effect, you know, him being able to close his eyes and still see like the what's it, the circuits and all that. Yeah, whatever's going on with the projection and reinforcement, it's like, oh, you can actually see that. I think there was one more thing too. Oh yeah, it was the, I don't even know where that's at now. I think it was 20 minutes in. But basically the difference between the reinforcement and then the projection. So I think the reinforcement, I think, yeah, Tsiah, he said it was better because it actually, I think it's 20 to 30% better than like the original like object. So like if it was a wooden sword, he reinforces it, yeah, 20-30% better. And I think it was something else too, but I forgot. And then after that, the projection compared to the original, you know, object or whatever. So I guess Excalibur or something, Shirou would at least be able to have at least 30 to 40% of that power. So I think that was just something little. I think, well, I mean, I pretty much knew it wasn't going to be his full power anyways, but still just something little that I didn't exactly accurately know. Yeah, but like, what's the accurate percentage? So yeah, now I kind of know. Yeah, there was something else. So yeah, this is, yeah, that was like way, yeah, this is way deep in there. Yeah, I don't even know where to go for that. But basically, I kind of know what he meant there. And I think I might just end this off here. Oh yeah, yeah, all of that too. Yeah, being able to be resistant, yeah, fall like one story or just literally fall down a flight of stairs and still will definitely survive. Yeah, I don't think he's gonna die from just some stairs, but at least able to, yeah, just literally get back up and keep on moving. Yeah, other than that, I think that's about it. Oh yeah, remember, yeah, imagine losing by the tip of a sword, right? But yeah, just something random. Other than that, that is it. Yeah, I have made it through. Maybe next time I might actually do half and half. It just depends. But yeah, I just had the time for now. Other than that, I hope you guys did enjoy. Make sure you like, subscribe again, and y'all just see you guys in the next one.